All right, let's just get started. So again, my name is John Gestel. I am the Client Relations Coordinator here. Beside me is Rob Bernhard, Corporate Counsel, and Dayton O'Connor, our lead analyst. So we're just going to dive into these questions here. First one, how is the asset treated? Is it a security? How are royalty payments in future guaranteed to be correctly processed? Rob, go ahead and take that one.
Yeah. So pretty much every asset on Royalty Exchange is just a one-to-one sale of a royalty income asset. We have done a few private syndicate deals that are considered securities, but otherwise it's really just treated as an asset sale between one seller and one buyer. And then the second part of that question is how are future royalty payments guaranteed to be correctly processed. So how it works is once you purchase a royalty stream on Royalty Exchange, Royalty Exchange steps in and becomes the administrator of those payments on your behalf. So we collect those from whoever the original royalty distributor was. The seller then directs them to Royalty Exchange as the administrator, and then we pay them through to the investor. So then we have insight into all the information, the data, and if there are any issues, we usually can catch those and resolve them pretty quickly.
Perfect. Awesome. Next one here is please explain private syndicates, which Rob, you already touched on a little bit. Want to just expand on that?
Yeah, I teed myself up for the second question. So this private syndicates, we've only done 3 of these things, and these are for larger royalty assets, and they've all were, I believe, sales between $2 and $4 million, to where we wanted to give more people access to those royalty streams. So what we did was we created a special purpose vehicle, an LLC, that purchased the royalties from the seller. And then what we did was we sold membership units in that LLC to investors. And in that case, you did have to be an accredited investor. It was considered an unregistered security. So we had to do the filings with the SEC and all that good stuff. And we haven't done anything recently with those. They are more geared towards like the much larger assets that we come across. I'm not saying that we won't, it's just we kind of take those cases as they come to us.
Awesome. Next one here, please explain how streaming payouts, for example, Spotify, get divided between mechanical and public performance. So in our investor guides, we actually do have a breakdown of the differences between mechanical royalties and public performance royalties. But Rob, you want to extrapolate on that?
Yeah. And if we're talking purely on an on-demand stream, the numbers a little fuzzy. Every kind of platform has their own calculation. But let's just say Spotify collects the income. They keep 30% for themselves. The sound recording side, so that would be the labels and artists, they get a little over 50%. And then you have roughly, I think like 17% left, and 70%, that 17% then gets paid to the musical composition owners, so that's the publishers and the songwriters. And between that, it's roughly split half and half goes the public performance royalty, then half goes to a streaming mechanical, which would be tied to that actual stream.
Great, awesome. Next one here, is there generally a minimum purchase investment as a quote general rule? Not officially. Really on the low end for asset prices, you should expect somewhere in the $5,000 to $10,000 US dollar range, but of course that can vary. Sometimes we see assets under 5K, and obviously we see lots of assets over 10K. But that's really what you should expect as a minimum, just realistically. So yeah, those ones that are under 5K are pretty few and far between. Next, is the royalty a monthly check? Can you live solely off the royalties? Why are artists selling royalties? And can one be a millionaire? So first part of that question, is it a monthly check? It can be. It depends on the entity that's providing the royalty payments. Most commonly we see quarterly payments, but some will pay monthly, some will pay annually. Always check the distribution frequency for an asset you're interested in purchasing, just so you have a good idea of what to expect moving forward. Can you live solely off the royalties? I suppose you could if you purchased enough assets and are generating enough money from them to live. Why are artists selling royalties? We see a ton of reasons why. A pretty common reason is artists are looking to develop their own careers. So looking for that large cash injection to, either build an at-home studio or, promote their next album or whatever that might be. But honestly, people are selling for any reason. Anyone would sell any asset. Sometimes they need to put a down payment on a house, start a college fund for their kids, anything like that can really justify them selling their royalties. Is there anyone within your company driving sales for the asset classes? Yes, we do have full-time staff that reaches out to royalty holders, artists, managers of artists, the whole docket. But a lot of the traffic that we see is actually word of mouth referrals from other artists who had a good experience with us. So healthy mix of the both. How long do royalties last? Are there terms? Yes, we do see 3 general term lengths on royalty exchange. We see our 10-year terms, our 30-year terms, and life of rights. Dayton, do you want to expand on the different term lengths there a little bit?
Sure. I mean, you had generally covered it. The short-term deals for 10-year terms, the 30-year terms, and life of rights, those are similarly situated given how long we expect those life of right assets to retain their value.
Great.
But royalties in and of themselves, they can be generating income for an indefinite period. The most valuable assets that we have on the platform, those are high dollar rate tracks and releases that have evergreen appeal. And for those kind of assets, they can be consumed by users across multiple platforms for, the foreseeable future.
Awesome. Next one here, is there a central database on music royalties that an investor can subscribe to? Not to my knowledge, Rob, Dayton, I don't know if you guys are aware of any database.
Not if you're looking to track royalty payouts, individual royalty streams. We always say that royalty exchange is probably the only public place that people can go and gather all the data on a ton of different assets, and generally they're not publicly available, but royalty exchange makes that data public on all of the assets that are for sale.
Great. Next one here, are there any ongoing / additional costs after purchasing royalties? From royalty exchange, no. We obviously administer the royalty payments, but there's no ongoing fee for that. It's a free service we provide. But there are fees from the larger entities that are providing the royalty payments. Now that fee is taken out prior to the financials you see on our site. So those are all net of fees. But from us, no, there are no ongoing costs. Current assets listed on the exchange show info through third quarter 2020. If bought today, 3/29, when would payments begin and for what period? Rob, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So the vast majority of assets you're going to see on royalty exchange are ASCAP and BMI, public performance royalties, and both of those societies pay 6 months in arrears. So the performance period happens, and then 6 months later, 2 quarters later, the actual payment for that performance period comes out. So that when you go onto any asset now, you'll see that the third quarter of 2020 has just paid out in March. So the next payment will come in June, and that'll cover the fourth quarter of 2020. Now, the way that the deals are structured here on royalty exchange is we sell the asset, the seller sells the asset based on payment date rather than performance date. So if you buy an asset on today, April 13th, you're entitled to all the payments that get paid after April 13th, regardless of when those were actually earned. It's much easier to calculate that way, and that way everyone's on an even footing on who knows what information and when. So the investor has all the same information that the seller has in this instance.
Next one here, why do listed royalties tend to be performance and not mechanical? When does royalty exchange send out the royalty payments? Rob?
Sorry, I was taking a sip of coffee. Why do they tend to be performance and not mechanical? It's really just a function of the folks that we deal with and the ease of transfer of these assets. We've done hundreds of ASCAP and BMI deals. There's very specific structures in place. We know that the songwriter we're working with in that case is able to transfer those royalties. We have a direct connection with the PROs. So that's generally why the vast majority is what you'll see, is because we know if we're very comfortable with the asset, we know that it's transferable. There's no other parties when you're selling a songwriter's public performance royalties that could get a cut of that. If they're being paid by their PRO, they're entitled to their cut of the royalties. So there's no additional publishing agreements that we would have to consider in those cases. So they're just much easier to transfer, and there's a much more defined process for doing so.
Awesome. Next one here, what are the perks of being an investor? Simply put, it allows you to buy assets on Royalty Exchange. Obviously, these assets are in high demand, so the perks are your access. Next one here, what are some methods used to figure out the future returns of an asset? Now, obviously, we're not financial advisors, so take what we have to say with a grain of salt. But Dayton, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So when we're evaluating these assets, we are taking a look at a range of historic distributions up through the most recent payment. And within that, we have a lot of data to take a look at. We're usually evaluating how that asset is going to trend based on the dollar age of the asset, taking a look at how old all of the different tracks are in that release, and taking the weighted age of that asset, as well as the trends that we're seeing in the historic data with respect to how different sources are performing. Of course, if there's an asset that is heavily indexed on streaming services, we would expect that to perform better given the increases that we're expecting to see for streaming over the next few years.
Awesome. Next one here, how are royalties paid out and why do some royalties take over a year to be paid? So that really depends on the entity. Like we mentioned earlier, some entities will pay annually and some will pay monthly, even quarterly. So in the cases where it's an annual payment, sometimes depending on when you purchase it, it could take over a year. But yeah, ultimately it depends on the entity. I don't know, Rob or Dayton, if either of you guys have more to add there.
No, that's right. Yeah, so it really depends on what the distribution schedule is for the underlying distributor, which will always be listed in the asset listing, whether it's a direct listing or an auction. You'll see the frequency at which payments are made, and then when we expect that next payment to be made.
Great. Next one here, are there set prices for rights that must be met during auctions, or does the highest bidder always win the rights? Highest bidder always wins. We do not have a reserve price for those. That would essentially be the starting price. So yeah, at auction, that is a guaranteed sale. Not like the exchange where asset owners have the option to accept offers or set a list price, etc. Next one here, since Royalty Exchange does not provide investment advice, I'd like to understand how I can do due diligence myself. Dayton, thoughts there?
That's an interesting question. I mean, if we're talking post asset acquisition, you'll have access to distribution statements where you can evaluate over time how your asset is performing. Rob, do you have anything else for that?
Yeah, no, I think the best information really is just looking at what happens on the marketplace, following other sales, looking at comparable assets that we've already sold. We have a ton of information on our blog that I would certainly recommend checking out. But as far as trying to compare assets, I mean, I think we have a wealth of data that you can certainly tap into and get some information on that just by following the marketplace.
Great. Next one here, what other royalty assets other than music do you sell? Really most forms of intellectual property. So we've hosted trademark royalties, book publishing royalties, film and television royalties, I believe even photo royalties at some point in the distant past. Music, obviously the most common, but really most forms of intellectual property. Next one here, are you required to hold the royalty for a specific amount of time before selling to another investor? So yes and no here. It depends on the medium of sale. For new assets that come to the marketplace, there's a certain period of time where we have to actually confirm a successful reassignment. In that period, normally we won't do a resale because we need to confirm that the transaction was successful. So if it's a new asset, there could be a short period of time where you'd have to wait. But really anything you buy on Royalty Exchange can be resold on Royalty Exchange, and that would be the only holding period, so to speak, for an asset. Rob, Dayton, anything else you guys want to add to that?
No, that's right.
No.
Next one here, once an investment is made, what are the logistics that allow for the investor to receive royalty payments? Rob?
Yeah, so the way it'll happen when you make your first purchase, the seller, if the royalty stream is not already being administered by Royalty Exchange, will direct their distributor to pay royalty exchange going forward. And then what we do is we enter an accounting agreement with the investor. Our job is to collect those royalty payments from the distributor and pay them out to the investor. The agreement gives us 30 days to do it. I think we're averaging somewhere around 10. But really, it's more of just having insight into the stream, collecting the payments, and then shifting them out to the investor.
Perfect. Next one here, how to assess the level of risk in a royalty investment and how liquid is a royalty investment. So the second one we kind of already answered. First one, I would say dollar age is a pretty good metric. Dayton and Rob, you guys have anything else to add to that?
I'll just touch on dollar age, and also we'll take a look to like if there are frequently non-recurring payments within a specific asset. Like we would say that a song that is being performed at radio that is, say, a track older than 10 years is probably a relatively low risk investment versus a younger single that's come out or tracks that generate a lot of their revenue from non-recurring sources, such as synchronizations. If a song is used in a commercial and that is driving the value of royalty payments, once that advertising campaign ends, you're also going to see a decrease in those royalties. That's something we consider to be relatively risky.
Great. Next one here, are all payments paid annually? No, we have different payment timelines depending on the entity. What are the, quote, international sources? So Dayton, you want to take that one?
Sure. Across the globe, you have similarly situated entities, such as we have in the US, labels, publishers, performance rights organizations, that are monitoring and tracking and paying out royalties for uses of tracks in their respective territories. On the PRO side, that can be entities like PRS in the UK, Jazz Rack in Japan. All the labels and major publishers operate across the globe through entities and sub-publishers. And of course, they are tracking performances on many of the same types of sources that we would in the US, all the major streaming services, radio, TV, etc.
Got it. Awesome. Next one here is please walk through performance versus mechanical when I stream one of my songs on Spotify. We did address that one earlier. So take another look at the recording to get that answer. Next one here is found a song from Shakira on the exchange, but had heard that Hypnosis Records is managing all of them. Is this listing legit? Rob.
Yeah, so what that likely is for any given song, you're going to have a lot of different players that were involved in creating it. So we would have maybe upwards of 5 or 10 songwriters on a song. Each one of those songwriters would be entitled to their percentage that they contributed towards that song, and they get to collect that directly from their PRO. So if it's a public performance royalty, none of that money ever touches the publisher. If it's the songwriter royalty, that goes directly to the PRO and then to the songwriter. So a lot of times what you'll see is assets on royalty exchange for fairly big named artists would have songwriters that earn a smaller cut, someone that you may have not heard of before, but they are entitled to those payments nonetheless. So then those royalties get paid directly to them, and they are freely able to assign those to anyone else. So we see major publishers or other investment entities that are buying catalogs. Yes, they're probably buying the publishing rights, perhaps the master rights. And then they have the ability to go out and license those things, but that does not change the underlying songwriters and their payments that come from their PRO.
Awesome. Great. Next one here. Can we link our crypto wallet with royalty exchange? No, we do not accept payment via cryptocurrency. All payments must be made in US dollars. Again, as I'm sure many of you know, within our 2 business day payment timeline, which is a pretty strict rule on the site. Next one, how can I increase my ROI on a catalog after I purchase it? Rob, thoughts on copyright stuff?
Yeah, so if you're looking to be an active player in the music industry, the vast majority of assets on royalty exchange are not going to allow you to do any licensing of that asset, to go out and authorize someone else to use it, like in a movie or a commercial or something like that. So really, these are passive assets. There's already a publisher involved whose job it is to go out and monetize them. Now, on a absolute micro level, you could buy a song and put it on repeat on Spotify in an empty room in your house, and you might see another 2 pennies over a year. But other than that, you should expect that most of these are going to be passive assets.
Awesome, great. Next one here, how quick is the process? I'm going to assume this is from a buying perspective. Process is pretty quick. You'll receive all contracts and payment information same day as your purchase. Normally everything gets signed within that 2-day window and payments received. And then it's just how quick it takes us to reassign. For receiving payment, depends on when you purchase compared to the distribution schedule for the entity overseeing that asset. We've seen people buy the day before a distribution, in which case they see payments right away. Some people buy the day after distribution, then sometimes have to wait as much as a full year, as we talked about earlier. So it really depends, but normally it's pretty fast. Next one here, is there a way to see longer revenue history on assets? For example, the Vanessa Williams Save the Best for Last. Yes, we do have the raw data file for the life of the royalty revenue for every listing. You can always see that, especially on the exchange where the Vanessa Williams asset is. Just go to that listing page and you should be able to look at that raw data there.
A caveat to that, John, is really it's whatever's available to us is what gets put on the auction. So I think a lot of the societies probably changed their royalty payout systems sometime in the mid 2000s, I think. So I don't think we have a ton of information that goes, if it's a ASCAP royalty that goes back to like the 80s or 90s, but it's really whatever we have is put into the raw data.
Perfect. Next one here, how are royalties tracked? Generally speaking, it's these larger entities that are providing the royalty payments. Rob, Dayton, I don't know if you guys want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so in the terms of public performance, so you have your performance rights societies, and like we mentioned, ASCAP and BMI are the biggest in the U.S. There's also CSAC and GMR. Then every country has one or more of their own societies. They're all tracking the different uses in their own country, and then reporting to each other on those uses. And that's on the public performance side. And here in the U.S., on the mechanical side for streaming, they've just established what's called the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which is kind of, analogous to a PRO. And what they do is they track all of the uses of their songs, really any song from the streaming providers, collect those royalties, and then send them out usually to the publishers based on for the mechanical uses of those songs. So they're kind of like a mechanical PRO, is what it seems like.
Great, awesome. Next one here, do I need to be an accredited investor to invest? No, you don't, unless you wanted to participate in a private syndicate, in which case you would need to be an accredited investor, but generally speaking, no, you don't need to be an accredited investor. Next, if you want to make purchases for certain music songs, do I have a digital wallet or portfolio to keep track of? Not exactly. The way that you would really track your assets would be through our admin portal, where you also receive payments. So that's where we'll provide you ongoing financials, all that kind of information there. So that's a good method. But also, the listing will be up on the exchange, assuming that's where you bought it. So that will keep up-to-date financials. So you can always track that way, but no formal digital wallet, so to speak.
Yeah, and again, every transaction on Royalty Exchange is a one-to-one transaction between buyer and seller. You don't have to have a pre-funded account. You just need to fund each purchase within the 2 business days. So there's no specific account that you need to have opened with Royalty Exchange, other than just having be verified as a bidder.
Perfect. Next one here, what does the cash flow curve typically look like for this asset? Dayton?
Yeah, sure. For younger tracks, something around 1 to 2 years post-release, we would expect the bulk of the royalties to be paid out for that asset. And in the subsequent year or two, declines of up to 50% from peak payout. After about years 3 to 5, that's when we would typically expect to see cash flows normalize and for the earnings to flatten out, at which point you get the benefit of those long tail of distributions.
Got it. Awesome. Next, we got another question here about private syndicates, which we did discuss earlier. So I'd say take a look at that answer from earlier. And then we have a question about life of rights terms, which again, we addressed earlier. So I'd say take a look at that. What's the most common misconception about this type of investment? That's a really good question. I would say the most common misconception is people think that you need to have this really granular, specific knowledge of the music industry and the intricacies of it and how it works to make sound investments. And that's not really the case. We see a lot of successful investors who, will buy an asset not knowing anything about the artist or the songs and do tremendously well. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that.
No.
No.
Okay, awesome. How does it work with taxes? Rob, tax question.
Sure. Yeah. And I always like to caveat this with, we're not a tax advisor, not qualified to give tax advice. So you should definitely check with your tax advisor for your specific situation. But the actual earnings, royalties are considered ordinary income. So you'll get a 1099 for all the royalty income that you earn. And then how that's reported is kind of up to you. There are options as far as amortizing your purchase. Generally, there's a couple options. You can do it over 10 years over an income forecast method that has a lot of calculations that you would need to update every year. There's also an option that you can look into as far as straight line depreciation over 10 years. So again, if you're interested in more information, I'd certainly recommend you check out your, contact your tax advisor.
Awesome. Next question here. How will Bitcoin affect the industry? I would say your guess is as good as ours. How is Bitcoin going to affect the global markets and general passing of hands of money? We don't know. But we're obviously keeping an eye on it just so we can adjust as needed. Next question here, can the royalties be paid in installments? I'm going to assume, can the purchases be paid in installments is the root of that question. And the answer is no. Assets must be paid in their entirety, again, within that 2 business day payment window. Next, what happens at the end of term life for the royalty? Can you continue to hold it, or do you have to auction it again? We kind of answered this one, but Rob, you want to just touch on it again?
Yeah, just to clarify. So if you purchase a limited term asset, so let's just say 10 years, after 10 years worth of payments, that asset automatically reverts to the seller. So you wouldn't have the opportunity to hold on to it. It would just happen automatically. And you wouldn't be necessarily forced to sell it any period of time. It just no longer belongs to you after a certain period of time. And I guess to clarify in the life of rights, what we're talking about is the life of copyright. So the royalty payments are always tied to the copyright. And here in the US, that's generally for stuff created after 1978 would be the royalty, the copyright is good for the life of the last surviving author of a work plus 70 years. So once that period is over, then no one needs to get a license to play the music. It enters the public domain, which means the royalties go away. So that's how a life of rights asset would end.
Awesome. And then is there an FAQ for investors to get smart? So this would be that. We also have a general site FAQ. So if you have general questions, they can normally be answered there. And of course, we have lots of investor guides. So you can find those on the blog page. That's where we keep all of our resources split into 2 sections. One's dedicated to investors, one's dedicated to creators. Just go to the investor stuff. Again, most questions can be answered there. And then also reach out to us. Obviously we're very receptive to questions, things like that. So, we're always happy to help as we can. Last one here for the submitted questions. Is there a different service fee depending on the amount of the purchase, or is it $500 regardless of the transaction, not a percentage? It is percentage based on the price. So it's actually the greater between $500 or 1% of the final asset price. So you really will only see a higher fee if you're paying more than $50,000 for an asset, in which case it'd be 1%. And of course, we do waive that buyer's fee for our all access members. It's one of the perks of the paid premium membership we have. All right, so that covers it for the submitted questions. Now we can get to our live questions here. I see there's a bunch that have come through. We'll start with this first one here. Do you see a predictable / reliable differential in valuations, IRR, between low price catalogs, say sub 100K, versus high price catalogs, meaning over 100 or even 500K? Great question. Dayton, I don't know if we have any analytics around that to say one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't think this is a question about low price, high price. It's really something that needs to be evaluated on a catalog by catalog basis. You're going to look at what the trend is in the earnings, and you're going to look at what it's earned historically, because you can have an asset that's generating, a little bit of royalty, but maybe it's 20 years old, and that's going to be something you get a consistent return on. It's just not going to be expensive because it's just not generating that much money. Whereas you can have assets that on the other end of the scale have been recent releases, are getting paid really significant amounts by publishers, PROs, and a lot of that leads to a bonus that's tied to performance, which is going to peter out pretty quickly. So it's less about how the asset is priced between low value and high value, if you're talking about that price point, and more about how old is the asset and how has it performed historically.
Yeah, and to take it down to an absolute granular level, say there was a single song asset and it had two songwriters. One wrote 99% of the song and one wrote 1% of the song. If we listed both of those assets, they would have the exact same trends. The price of what is going for sale is not really affected at all, because what it's underlying is the same exact song, just in different proportions.
Got it. Awesome. Next one here. The industry talks about a greater than 10-year flattening or even growth in royalties given uptake in streaming /sub/sync/social platforms. Do you generally agree with this, despite it really being catalog specific? Thoughts, guys?
I mean, that corresponds to a lot of the research that I've seen. I would also take that with a grain of salt, because it's very hard to predict what's going to be happening in terms of how music is consumed and what platform it's being consumed on that far into the future. But that corresponds to what I've seen from different sources. That being said, it really does come down to the catalog.
Yeah.
A rising tide is going to lift all boats if we're talking about streaming, if we're talking about digital, but at the end of the day, you need to evaluate what's happening on a catalog by catalog and, even down to like a per track basis.
All right, next one here. What indemnifications are in place for the investor? What recourse is there if royalty stream is not remitted as agreed? Rob?
Yeah. So as we talked about before, so each transaction is a purchase between the seller and the buyer. So what the seller is doing, they are making the representations as to the royalty stream, and also providing indemnifications if any of those representations turn out to be incorrect. So it's a contractual right that you have as an investor against the seller if there were to be an issue with the royalty streams or any of their representations in that purchase agreement, which you can find an example of linked there in our terms of use on the website if you want to check out that.
Perfect. All right, next one here. Given Taylor Swift's re-record and the shifting economics between artists and labels, have you seen or do you anticipate seeing changes to existing royalty contracts in favor of artists? Another tough one. I don't know, guys, thoughts?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I think, go ahead, Dayton.
Go ahead, Rob.
Oh,
Go ahead.
well, obviously this is a super special case where Taylor Swift is, obviously mega powerful, and if they have enough clout with their fans and the ability to kind of do this on their own, I think it seems like it's going to be a viable strategy. I think that's certainly the exception rather than the rule, but it certainly could change things. We're seeing a lot of things, a lot of folks releasing things DIY, right? Like they don't need a label to even initially release, because you can just get your music in front of people by uploading it directly to the distributors yourselves. So, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think to that point, the larger trend you're seeing of the continued democratization of the creation of music and moving away from major labels as kind of this main source of power within the industry, to having companies and tools be available to artists to release their music onto different kinds of platforms. I don't think that's going to change. To Rob's point, I think that the Taylor Swift case is something that shows a potentially viable strategy for certain artists. I think it's also very unique because of how high profile her specific dispute has been in terms of how her masters have been bought and sold. And I also think that, it's also interesting that a high profile artist had a lot of time on her hands because of COVID when she would otherwise be touring, that would give her the opportunity to re-record all of her stuff. Because if you're a major artist, you've also got to balance putting together new releases and touring and everything else you do for your career against re-recording everything in your catalog. So I would maybe, not use the Taylor Swift as like an example of where things are going, and kind of you could look at this very interesting specific use case.
Awesome. Next one here, what is the dollar age? Great question. Dollar age is very important. It's essentially a metric we use to help to determine the consistency of earnings over time. But it is weighted, takes a little bit more into consideration. We have a pretty in-depth blog post about it, which you should be able to access on, I would think, every listing. There's a link to the dollar age article. So I'd say take a look at that. But in essence, it's how we help measure the volatility or consistency of a catalog's earnings over its lifespan. Anything to add to that, Robert or Dayton?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that a longer dollar age is probably going to indicate that it has more of a potential for a longer tail of earnings in the future. And like you said, it's weighted so that if the highest earning song in a catalog has been earning for 20 years, but there's also a song that has been earning for 1 year, those all get weighted in together, and the one that's been earning for longer and has more earnings attached to it is going to factor into dollar age more.
Great. Dayton, anything to add to that?
Nope, that's it.
Great. Next one here is royalty investing sustainable? Given my information, 90% of the new songs trend for almost 8 years maximum. So this kind of ties in with the dollar age question. So like we discussed earlier, yes, there's typically a large spike in earnings in the early stages of an IP release, but those earnings will stabilize at a certain point. And yeah, your 8-year metric, that's pretty in line with what we see. I would say it's sometimes closer to 6 years. Sometimes it can be 10, but it really depends on the asset. As with most of these, the asset really dictates what to expect moving forward, the caliber of it, what artists are involved, things like that.
And how much you paid for it.
Yeah, for sure. Anything to add to that, guys?
Nope.
Perfect. All right. Next one here. Can I sell offline the royalties that I bought on Royalty Exchange? Rob, you want to take that one?
Yeah, if you privately find a buyer for a royalty stream that you own and is administered by Royalty Exchange, you certainly feel free to explore that. Then obviously the transaction you'd have to handle on yourself and the contracts and everything as far as that goes. So we wouldn't have the resources that Royalty Exchange has templated out for those transactions, but there's no legal requirement for you to only sell it on Royalty Exchange.
Awesome. Next question here, are partial investments allowed on non-securitized assets? On Royalty Exchange, no, these are 1-for-1 transactions. The only case where you would be buying a partial of an asset would be through a private syndicate, which again are securities. So that would be the only case. Rob, Dayton, I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
No, that's right.
Great, perfect. Next one here. Are any Sona pandemic emergency grants included in historical royalty payments?
Yeah, I'll just take a shot at that. Yeah, the Sona emergency payments, if they are reflected in the statements for the asset that is subject to sale on our platform, then it would be reflected in there, as would any payments that relate to that particular source. That being said, we would also try to pull the value of that Sona payment out of any forecasted royalties because it's going to be non-recurring. But that's something that would generally apply to any earnings that relate, or any statements that relate to and earnings that relate to an asset on sale on our platform, not just Sona, but for any payment, any source.
Awesome. Next one, are you planning on selling NFTs? I would say no, there's no plans to, but we'll see what happens. Rob, Dayton, any other thoughts there?
We'll see what happens.
All right, next one here, who is actually paying the royalty to you? Do they know the royalty has been assigned? So the payments would come from Royalty Exchange since we act as that administrator. But given that the purchase is a direct purchase between you and the rights holder themselves, yes, they are aware of the sale. They've been active in the creation of the listing and the entire process. So while the overarching performing artist may not be privy to the sale, the rights holder definitely is. Rob?
And yeah, and I think maybe to clarify a little bit, so the distributor of the royalties is aware, because Royalty Exchange facilitates the transaction, notifies the seller signs a direction that a assignment has taken place. They notify the distributor, and then the distributor pays us.
Yep, great addition. Dayton, any other thoughts there?
No.
Great. Next one. For a newcomer that wants to test the water, are there or will there be offerings of the low end of things sub 5K? For example, a single song or a fraction of an album. So we did address this very early on. In rare cases, you can find assets under 5,000. We had a couple go through in the last few months here, but they're pretty rare. Really, 5K is the low you should expect. We can't speak to any future assets coming because no asset is an asset until it goes live on the site. So I'd say don't hold your breath. They could come up, but we'll see. Rob, Dayton, any other thoughts there?
No, I guess up until the Little Dicky auctions that we had done over the last couple of weeks, I would have said that exclusively anything under 5K would pop up on the exchange for a direct sale. But there are instances we'll do a smaller auction as well. So just kind of got to keep your eyes peeled.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, to that point, we're constantly testing the bounds of the marketplace and what we can include there. So yeah, best way, like Rob said, is just keep your eyes on the market. Next one here, how easy is it to sell your asset when it's got only a few years of rights left? How long before the end is the best to resell it? If I don't resell it, I may actually lose the money in the way I've spent more money to pay for it than I got royalties out of it. Is that right? So I'm not sure that we have the data to say how easy it is to sell with only a few years left. So that one's tough to answer. But the liquidity options of the exchange are designed to make it easy to resell if you need to. Just bear in mind that you likely would have to adjust your price given the remainder of the term for an asset that you have, assuming it's a limited term. Rob, Dayton, any other thoughts to add to that?
I guess this might be a generalization, but I would say the majority of investors on Royalty Exchange are pricing these assets as if they're going to hold them for the entirety of the term. Yeah. And then if circumstances present themselves, then they can look at reselling. So buying them with the intent to flip, I don't know. I would probably lean towards most people are buying them to hold, and assuming that over the life of their ownership, they're going to make more money than what they spent on the asset, and not with a view to resell. Now, we've certainly had people that have had success reselling, but I don't know that that's the majority of folks that are participating here on the marketplace.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Ultimately, like Rob said, better to build your principal investment into your general returns table or whatever calculations you're doing to figure out your return. Yeah, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Next one here, how is dollar age calculated? Take a look at that article. Dollar age article actually has the formula for how we calculate it and what goes into it. So take a look at that. Next one, you confirmed the asset is not a security from a tax accounting perspective. Is it a receivable? Are there long dated assets that go for the life of the copyright? Rob, thoughts on that one?
Let's see. So yeah, like I said, I typically punt tax questions as far as possible. I'm certainly not an expert. A royalty payment is considered ordinary income. So I don't know how that would affect whether if there's a specific definition for a receivable that I'm just not aware of. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you there, Andrew.
Dayton, anything you have to add to that? All right. Next one here, what drives private syndicate offerings? Meaning, when is it decided to offer the royalties in that fashion? In short, I'd say price point. Normally when things get over $1 million, we tend towards a private syndicate option. Rob, any other thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's price, it's timeline, it's specifics with the asset and the seller's needs. You know, a lot of times we'll, you know, really we want to structure these deals that so that they're interesting to investors, but it also has to make sense for the seller as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but generally it's going to be something for a higher dollar point that we want to give more investors access to.
Great. Next one here, if there has been a Sona payment, would it be only in the CSV data file, or would you footnote it on the listing, much like the radio settlements are footnoted on the listing?
Yeah, I'll take that. This question's from Corey. Yeah, my apologies, but off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what source the Sona payments are routed through. It really depends on how it's reflected in their data. Different sources can account for different types of payments in different ways. I can imagine that there will be some distributors that would reflect that kind of information in their CSV, in their e-statement. There's others that may apply that on the top as some kind of financial adjustment, and then that contributes to the gross distribution on top. If we see that reflected in a statement somewhere, and if it's of a notable amount, I think that we would call it out in the description for the listing. But again, that's handled on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, great. Next one here, I missed the answer, sorry. Are you planning on selling NFTs? Short answer, no plans to, but we'll see what happens. Next one here, what has been the most successful case so far in royalty exchange in terms of ROI? And what do you think is the reason for this success? Man, that's a tough question. I don't have off the top of my head the most successful case. But, you know, we have seen some catalogs that have gone viral on TikTok, which obviously is, you know, massive windfalls. Some investors have gotten early on other songs that have blown up and seen huge returns in the early lifespans. But I don't know, Rob, Dayton, do you guys have a specific test case in mind that you can think of?
Nothing that I could speak to what the reason for that success was. You know, there's a lot of different reasons on why something might increase in value, or maybe you know, was undervalued to begin with. You know, really, it's I'm certainly not the expert on digesting cash flows and doing any projections or anything like that, so I hesitate to give any sort of specifics.
Dayton, anything?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of echo Rob there. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, like the top 5 by ROI percentage. But I would say that the way that we view this platform is that these are assets that are, you know, being priced in such a way that, you know, it's going to be generating an expected return. So that way it's less about what are you going to buy into that has like potentially the highest ROI, some sort of outsized expectation, but more that there's going to be this regular recurring passive income that's flowing over to you that gives you an expected and, you know, beneficial return and quality yield compared to other assets you'd see in the market.
Awesome. Yeah, the only case that I could bring up, which again, I don't have the ROI figures off the top of my head, but again, that one that went viral, that one was netting roughly like $1,000 a month. It was a monthly payout asset. And then once the TikTok viral episode happened, it spiked to like $30,000 a month. So that I've seen happen through assets that we admin, but you know, again, that's kind of like winning the lottery when stuff like that happens. So, you know, don't hold your breath for those ones. Okay, next one here is royalty exchange a regulated exchange? Rob?
No.
All right. Next one here. Are there assets that go for the life of the copyright as opposed to a 10-year limit? Yes, we see lots of those cycling through. Take a look at the exchange. You can filter by actual term length there. So if you only wanted to see life of rights assets, you could do so there. And then next one here, what inning of ball game would you say artist awareness of royalty exchange is in?
I love a baseball themed question.
First inning being not aware, ninth inning being everyone is aware.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's say, all right, we got our starter. We're through the first inning and he's just starting to warm up a little bit. You know, he's cruising along a little bit, but we're not thinking about pulling the starter. It isn't a official win yet. He hasn't gone 5 innings. So I'd say we're in the third inning, I guess. Plenty of time to run to the concession stand and grab a beer. So lots of upside.
I would venture to say probably 3rd inning also be my guess. Dayton, thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say that we're in the relatively early stages, and I think that we're also benefiting from a lot of the media coverage that happens of royalty exchange and of other players in this space involving catalog acquisitions. People see those, and then that brings more attention to us.
Great. So another question here on regulations. Royalty exchange not being regulated, might it cause some difficulties or obstacles in the future? Rob, thoughts?
Only if we start structuring assets as securities where they would come into a regulatory scheme. I think really that's a business decision is if we want to bring on those types of regulations. It's really kind of the offerings that we would choose, and that's not the direction we're going right now.
And another one here from Corey. Are artists seeing a valuation benefit to them from selling into a retail investor cap rates versus traditional hedge fund, private equity, etc.? Thoughts, guys?
I would be guessing, but I think, I don't know. I would think like money is money, regardless of where it comes from. I think obviously once you get a catalog that's just too big for a private retail investor to get involved in, then that's when you're going to go to the funds. But I think a lot of those valuation methodologies are becoming more and more known, I guess, by all the players involved. So yeah, I mean, long story, long answer, I don't know.
Dayton?
Yeah, I mean, you're comparing 2 different business models. So I don't think it's quite appropriate. And also, bear in mind that like there are artists at the very top end of the market that may have a premium, like a kudos benefit attached to their name. That is also going to be applicable to a handful of artists and performers. So a lot of those cases that you might be seeing of like the Bob Dylans of the world, that's not going to be applicable to 99% of the artists that are involved in these kind of royalty transactions at royalty exchange, in all the other players in private equity that are doing these kind of deals.
Awesome. So another one here. What are the main differences between you and the hypnosis fund? Generally, hypnosis fund, you're buying equity in hypnosis. And that's how you are participating. With us, it's a direct transaction between you and the sellers. You're actually getting the royalty entitlement. That I'd say is the short answer. Rob, Dayton, do you guys want to expand on that?
Yeah, royalty exchange is the marketplace. It's a place for buyers and sellers to connect individually. Hypnosis is purchasing catalogs and then is selling shares of itself publicly. So then that's really more of a wider net of a lot of different royalty streams. Where on royalty exchange, it's a one-to-one transaction.
Great. Next one here. Is there a sample of the bilateral contract available so we can do our due diligence on the terms? Yes, all of our agreements are viewable on the site. Rob mentioned earlier, you can view them through the terms of use. So yeah, you can view all.
Just click terms of use at the bottom of the page and you'll find links to the standard agreements.
Great. Awesome. Next here, is there a difference between you and SongVest? Rob, you want to take that one?
I mean, I assume the models are the same. I think I haven't seen a lot of what SongVest has been doing lately, but it seems like a similar model. Royalty Exchange has a ton of assets on it, and I honestly don't know enough of what SongVest has been doing lately to have a thought on the differences, at least at this point.
Yeah, I've heard that they have not as wide of a pool of assets as what I've heard. But again, we're focused on making our product the best product we can, rather than what our other competitors, so to speak, might be doing. There's another one here. What about A-note music? Same answers apply. Next, do you believe the hypothesis that hypnosis can, quote, actively manage up royalty streams, and ours will rise along with if we own a portion of the same rights? Guys,
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, yeah, I think in a lot of instances, hypnosis does get the copyrights as part of their transactions, which means they do have the rights to go out and license these things. So they're kind of acting like, almost like a publisher, where they can go out and monetize the streams in ways that maybe they hadn't before. But yes, I also do agree that if there is someone out there who is actively interested in increasing the value of these things, anyone who is invested alongside them, whether it be an individual songwriter, anyone who owns a piece of those rights to that same music, would also benefit from their efforts.
Awesome. Anything to add to that, Dayton?
No.
Great. Now there's just one last question here on competition. Who do you see yourselves competing with? I mean, I don't really see us competing with anyone because no other marketplace that I've seen has the same transparency, breadth of assets, just general transparency. So it doesn't really seem like a competition to me. They just don't have the same visibility. Rob, Dayton, I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's good.
Cool. And then may have answered, sorry, if so, what is your cut or fee from the transaction? That's just our standard buyer's fee, greater between $500 or 1% of the final asset sale price. We do also take a take from the seller side. So if you were to resell your asset, there's a fee there. As an investor, if you bought an asset and resold it, if you were to resell on the exchange, your fee would be 8% of that final asset sale price, versus selling at auction, which would be 15% of the final asset sale price. And that, of course, is discounted for all access members as well. Okay, so that looks like it just about wraps up the questions here. Thank you all for coming. Really, really appreciate you guys taking the time and your interest. If you feel your question wasn't answered, or we mentioned that we might answered it earlier, take a look at the recording. We have this recorded and it will be posted in our investor webinars. And of course, please feel free to send in questions to us. We're always happy to help, answer questions, provide context as we can. Rob, Dayton, any closing thoughts you guys have?
No, just appreciate everyone's interest and questions. This was a good one. Thanks for coming.